No, the American chestnut's been really a keystone species when it was this, of course, blight times, and fed a number of wildlife, all the way from turkeys, grouse, squirrels, up to deer and bear, across the native range from Maine, all the way down through into Alabama. It was very important as a source of food due to its steady state of uh, mass that would be produced annually.
So, Staten Islander News Organization is here today with Stephen Hoy, North Regional Science Coordinator of the American Chestnut Foundation. The American Chestnut Foundation was founded in 1983 by a group of prominent plant scientists and laypersons who recognized the severe impact the demise of the American chestnut tree imposed upon the local economy of rural communities and upon the ecology of forests within the tree's native range. The American chestnut tree ranged over 200 million acres of eastern woodlands from Maine to Alabama and from the Piedmont West to the Ohio Valley until succumbing to a lethal fungus infestation known as the chestnut blight, or Cryphonectria parasitica, during the first half of the 20th century. An estimated 4 billion American chestnuts, one-fourth of the hardwood tree population, grew within this range. The goal of the American Chestnut Foundation is to restore the American chestnut tree to its former place in the ecosystem throughout its former range to provide a crucial and abundant food source for forest-dwelling animals such as chipmunks, squirrels, and birds, and probably if there was enough to provide for humans also. Hoy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with the American Chestnut Foundation?
Sure. So I've been with the Pennsylvania, New Jersey chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. It's broken up into 16 state chapters. So I've been with the PA New Jersey chapter since 2014, and took on the role of the North Central Regional Science Coordinator in 2023. Um, Native of Pennsylvania, and uh, have taken on all aspects of regional research. So everything from orchard management to tree propagation and inoculation and testing through to pollination work and harvesting of the birds and seeds we create.
Oh, awesome. Can you please talk about the history and importance, both to animals and the ecosystem, of the American chestnut?
Sure. Now, the American chestnut's been really a keystone species when it was this, of course, blight times, and fed a number of wildlife, all the way from turkeys, grouse, squirrels, up to deer and bear, across the native range from Maine, all the way down through into Alabama. It was very important as a source of food due to its steady state of uh, mass that would be produced annually. A lot of other trees, the oaks and the hickories, they are more cyclical in nature, so you'll have these cycles of a very heavy mass year and then followed by several years of a lighter or even no mass. Whereas chestnut has more of a consistent, steady crop that can be depended on by both wildlife and humans in the Appalachian region. Humans use the tree not only for the chestnuts themselves, which they would gather and store either for drying in attics and other buildings on the homestead and the farm, and they would grind it up and use it as kind of a flour substitute, all the way through using the trees themselves for lumber, um, specifically for like framing material, uh, railroad ties, things of that nature. It was incredibly rot resistant, so it could be, in contact with the ground, and it would maintain its structural integrity for many years, more than a lot of the other species that were available. And then it was also used in the leather industry as a source of tannin. So chestnut bark is extremely high in tannins, so it would be extracted and used in that process of tanning leather. And it's actually the um, the spread of chestnut blight is what brought about the need for a synthetic tannin alternative. So it actually, it really had impacts greater than what you would commonly relate to a single tree species.
Right, and also it made wood for they made a lot of wood from it for some like the furniture and stuff like that as well, right?
Yeah, so it would be used in furniture, and even some other construction processes. Normally, it was not the exterior of the furniture or other components in a home. It would be used as kind of the inner structural members because it was easy to work with. It was straight grained, and again, back to that rot resistant quality that it had was very desirable, but it wasn't deemed um, as aesthetically pleasing as some of the other species like your oak, your hickory, your maple. Um, so they would be used to kind of veneer the outside of those pieces of furniture.
Okay, cool. So why did the American chestnut decline, and how sudden was the decline of the chestnut?
In terms of tree time, and that's the term that'll probably come up a few times in this, it was rather sudden. The American chestnut, it was first noticed in the late 1800s that trees were starting to decline, specifically in New York and the Bronx Zoological Park, is where the blight fungus, Cryphonectria parasitica, was originally identified. Um, and by that point, it had spread, you know, to a greater portion of the New York state. And within 60 years, so starting in 1904 through 1965, the blight fungus had spread across the entirety of the American chestnut range. So it had reached the furthest extent north up into Maine and all the way down south into Alabama. Um, we've determined to the best of our ability that the blight most likely came over on exotic nursery stock, most likely Japanese chestnuts. And the key difference there are about 7 different species of chestnut. Of those, there are a few Asian species, specifically Chinese chestnut and Japanese chestnut, that are resistant to chestnut blight. So they can be infected with the blight. They are able to survive and coexist with the fungus, whereas the American chestnut had not been exposed to that pathogen and had no resistance to it.
Okay. And just so the chestnut blight is kind of like, in a sense, it's named so because it only affects chestnuts, or are there other secondary species of other kinds of trees or anything like that that can also catch it, I guess, and be killed?
It is most destructive to the American chestnut, and European chestnuts as well. But the chestnut blight can actually infect other tree species. It's just not nearly as detrimental. So it will survive on oak trees, as well as maple trees, um, and it will survive on dead material. So it's something called a necrotroph. So it needs dead tissue in order to actually feed. So in the case of the American chestnut, what will typically happen is the tree will experience a wound or some sort of damage that will create an opening for the fungal spores to land and colonize that area. And then it will begin to kill off the cells and then consume those cells and thereby expand and continue to infect the tree until several things will happen. One, it will infect the entire circumference of the tree, so that entire outer layer where the water and nutrients are flowing up and down the tree, and it will cut off that flow of nutrients. And at that point, you'll start to see the tree really decline. Any portion above that infection point will die, and at the same time, rain, other damage, even wildlife are transporting those spores further down the tree. So you'll see this progression of cankers, is what we call the infection point. you'll see this progression of cankers all the way down until it reaches the stump of the tree and the main stem is dead. Um, One of the reasons that we're still able to find the American chestnut now is that the root system remains intact. So it remains healthy. It still has energy reserves. So you'll get this cycle of the trees resprouting, sending up new sprouts until they become infected with the blight, and then eventually they'll die back. And it kind of sustains itself in this early successional condition, but does not frequently reach the age of reproductive maturity. So that's why the foundation considers the tree to be functionally extinct, because it's no longer filling that role, its historic role as a mass species for humans and wildlife.
So something you said that was interesting. So it starts in a canker in the tree, in the bark, and then it just kind of goes all the way around the bark of the whole tree, and then kind of goes up. Is that sort of like how it infects it?
So it will start in a, like, say there's a windstorm and a branch breaks. So that breakage point is the initial infection point, and then from there, the infection will progress down the tree. So blight spores are here. They're widespread, and that's one of the reasons that we're doing the research that we're doing. We'll get into this later, but the blight is not going to disappear. It is here to stay. There's plenty of material for it to, survive on, and as long as there's that dead material around, it's going to have a host to feed on.
So it's like one of those
So
things, kind of like there are always spores of certain mites that are in the air that can infect birds, but usually birds are okay, but then sometimes they'll get infected with it, or like any kind of mold spores that, they're always around. But it's just a matter of like landing on the right kind of substrate, like the chestnut tree in this case, or if it was like mold spores, like something else that mold would kind of attack. So it's like it's
yeah,
always going to be in the air, in other words.
yeah, it will always be here.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you were, if you had finished that thought or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I had briefly mentioned in the introduction what the American chestnut's original native range was. So it went all the way from Maine to Alabama, and then the Piedmont west to the Ohio Valley. What's the Piedmont? That's just like in
So
Pennsylvania?
that's the section in the Carolinas up into a little bit of Virginia, kind of I believe it's a Piedmont Plateau.
And I believe that Jules had mentioned that the American chestnut was in New York.
Yes, yeah. The American chestnut was widespread in the state of New York.
Was it in New York City as well, or was it just in like upstate areas?
So it was pretty well dispersed throughout the state. I can't speak specifically to whether it was present or absent within the city itself. I would imagine that if conditions were appropriate for it, that you could find it there.
Okay. And can you talk about the restoration efforts that your organization has been doing? And I also wanted to ask you, what is the age of maturity or age of reproduction rather, for an American chestnut? Like, how old is that?
The average age for reproductive maturity, and this will come with the caveat of under suitable environmental conditions and full sunlight, is 7 to 10 years. Obviously, if the tree is in a forested canopy site where it's not getting as much full sunlight on the canopy, it can take much longer. Um, what we're seeing in our field trials and planting sites currently is about 7 to 10 years for the trees to begin to flower, and then full uh, production is in that more 15 to 20 year time.
Okay. And so, can you please talk about the restoration efforts that your organization has been doing? Please discuss any genetic manipulations, plant crossings, as well as external antifungal applications that seem effective and promising.
Sure. So as you indicated in your intro, the foundation was started in the early 1980s, and the focus at that point was on what was called a conventional breeding program. And this was taken based on some of the early scientists, their work with vegetables and other crops, where to create a hybrid, there's a foundational um, framework of you need a minimum of 6 generations to make the cross that you wanted and then select for that specific trait or characteristic, or in our case with the American chestnut, that resistance. So we've been working on this breeding program for the past 40 years and have continued to refine those results. So this breeding program originates with a cross between a susceptible American chestnut and a resistant Chinese chestnut. Chinese chestnut is what we've chosen to use for some of the characteristics that it has and some of the better height qualities, but it's still not. Chinese chestnut on its own is not of a great enough height to compete in our forests. So that's why instead of just trying to plant an early cross, what we call an F1, an American by Chinese cross out in the forest, where it could not compete and it wouldn't retain that full level of Chinese chestnut resistance. Those trees have that's been attempted by other organizations in the past, and those trees have failed. So what we've learned from that is it's important to get as much of the American character and genetics back into that material, as well as retain the resistance to the chestnut blight, so that you have something that can still reach up into the canopy of our forests, but retain enough of the resistance to compartmentalize any infections, or you know uh, resist any infections by the blight itself. So that's been a primary focus of the foundation. That being said, and finding more and more information to support this, we're going to need multiple approaches in order to fully restore this tree back to the eastern forest. So it is going to take breeding work. It's going to take genetically engineered material or other genetic modification techniques, as well as where applicable and accepted, um, biocontrol. So things like a hypovirus. This is something that you can think of, a virus that infects the blight and essentially gives it the human equivalent of a cold. So it weakens that blight, and that weakening gives the tree a greater opportunity to compartmentalize and wall off that infection, prevent it from going the whole way around the tree and girdling the entire tree. Um, that's something that's received fluctuating amounts of attention, running into some challenges in terms of what's acceptable with various government entities. So that's used where possible and researched where possible, but is not widespread in implementation at this time. Genetic engineering and genetic manipulation is something that's also received a fair amount of attention, and we are working with some of our university partners to look into what's being called a wound inducible um, type of promoter. So something that will become activated upon damage being inflicted onto the tree, and that activation would allow the tree to again compartmentalize and prevent the blight from creating a large uh, killing wound on the tree. So this would commonly be done. Right now, we're working with something called oxalic oxidase, and this is something that is produced to counteract the oxalic acid produced by the blight. This is what one of the mechanisms the blight uses to kill the tissue before consuming it. So the oxidase neutralizes that acid and prevents that cell death.
I see. Okay. So, and I know that it had said something that you were crossing the something you were crossing it with the wheat for the oxalic acylate. Are you using CRISPR, a wash, a gene gun, something else? in lay terms, I guess.
Right. I, I'm not confident in my answer at the moment. I can get that information for you, but would rather not give you the wrong information right now.
Okay.
It is not. It is not CRISPR. I know that.
Okay. And so, would you be able to talk about the blight itself? Is it known where it originated? I know you've mentioned it does attack some other species than chestnuts, but it doesn't actually kill the other plants. I assume, like when you said it, it can infect oak and maple. Those trees would survive if they were attacked with it. Is that correct?
For the most part, there are extreme cases where some of those trees do end up dying. Normally, that's because the blight is a secondary effect, and something else is the primary causal agent of that those other than chestnut species dying from it. Um,
Okay. So, if you would
yeah.
be able to just talk about what you know about the blight itself, what type of fungus it is, like I think you had said it was a necrotroph, which means that it has to. So that's why it injects the oxalic acid, which it makes, and it's the fungus makes oxalic acid and injects it into the plant, and then that would kill the plant. So what else do you guys know about the blight itself?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, this is an exotic fungus that came over most likely from Japanese chestnut nursery stock in the late 1880s, most likely because individuals were looking to improve upon the American chestnut, which had a very small nut size in relation. So other species were brought in which have that characteristically larger chestnut, and just unknown at the time also brought along this pathogen. So that's as far as we can narrow down its origin. Uh, it does affect other species, so specifically oaks are another um, genus that will be infected by chestnut blight, mostly on this dead material where the fungus is able to consume that without working as hard to infect a portion of the tree, cause that initial infection point, and then have to uh, secrete the oxalic acid, which kills off the cells before it can be consumed. And that's what gives it the classification of a necrotroph, because it has to kill its host to get the food that it needs.
Okay. Um, okay, cool. So, with regards to oak, sometimes it will actually kill an oak tree as well, or it
There
prevent it.
there have
There have been.
there have been cases where that has happened. Again, that's
It's not that
not
common.
the causal um, agent for the tree's death. It's more of a opportunistic fungus at that point where it sees a vulnerable stressed tree and it's able to infect it.
Okay, cool. So, what can ordinary people do to get involved with your group?
Oh man, there's a lot that can be done. We really rely on citizen scientists, our volunteers and members. We're 5,000 member strong organization, and we have folks that do a wide range of things, everything from just going on hikes and being vigilant for what they think are American chestnuts and reporting those trees back to us. Germplasm genetic conservation is extremely important to the work that we're doing, whether it be genetically engineered or our traditional backcross breeding program. Diversity is key to having a an option to restore the material. The more genetically diverse, the greater our chance of success. So that's an easy avenue for folks to get involved. By all means, we encourage folks to become members within their local state or you know nearby state if you don't have a chapter within the state you're residing in, and get involved on that chapter level. Go to meetings, see what projects are being done within the state, and that will vary state to state. Some states are very active. New York is a very active chapter, and doing a lot of work with installing orchards and reporting trees. So that's a another great way for folks to see what's going on nearby to them, and hopefully get out in the field and participate that way. Uh, and then some alternatives if folks are more geared toward the educational side. We encourage everyone to, you know, become familiar with the story of the American chestnut and have these conversations like you and I are having, to share the information and get that story out there, because it's something that the generation that was familiar with American chestnut out in the woods and able to participate in harvesting the wild chestnuts from the ground, that portion of the population is not as robust as it used to be, and we really need to engage this younger audience that's not does not have that touch point with the species. So the best way to do that is to get this story out and to talk to folks. So I'd say those are the three easiest ways to get involved, and then we're always looking for unique skills. If folks have a interest in data entry or other social media skills, things like that, there are ways that we can engage and put that to use as well.
Right. And I had been watching a video from one of the people at your organization that one of the things you're trying to do is to get some kind of regulations changed for mining fields, like former mining sites, to, instead of using them to just grow weeds on, like just whatever grows, to actually restore them to use for orchards with the American chestnut. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm somewhat familiar with that. I know one of our research partners, Green Forest Work, has worked extensively with mineland reclamation sites. I'm sure there are other agencies and partners that are involved with this as well. But they're seeing um, good results with taking these spoil piles and other portions of former mineland sites and planting chestnuts on them, and getting them to be established and form a cover that would otherwise uh, be a prime site for invasive species and other types of quote unquote weeds.
I would be very curious to know if any of that has, like, if any of the former mining sites were certain metals that might be like helping with the blight itself, because I know during the Irish famine, which was another kind of blight, which was the potato blight, but it would infect other things. What they had found was that this lady who had a farm right next to a copper smelting plant, she had no blight at all on her whole field. She was the only source of potato, one of the only sources of potatoes still in Ireland during the famine. But nobody put the two and two together, and the one guy that did was ignored. So it was like that could have been like a natural way to have prevented the blight from having such an effect, is just using copper. Um, but yeah, so that was just something I wanted to mention also. And then, so can people, I was speaking with Jules about this, and she had said that you would kind of be, hold on a second, something just came up, more familiar with this. So can people purchase or receive tree saplings from chapters of your group? And if so, what are the requirements in terms of location, climate, and available space that one would need to plant a chestnut tree?
Yeah, so I'll take that, and if you don't mind, I'll do reverse order in your questions. For the American chestnut, the best types of sites are acidic soil, well drained, um, and moderately deep. So we're looking for something with a pH between 5 and 6 in general. Typically, it has a higher component of sand, so more of a sandy, loamy soil than a clay heavy soil. Um, Clay, by its nature, does not allow water to move through it as easily as a sand and loam will. So therefore, we're looking for those better draining sites, and staying away from clay. And then chestnuts are, they span a pretty wide range of our growing zones. So the plant hardiness zones, we're looking at all the way down into Alabama, which I believe is a zone 8, and all the way up into Maine, so that zone 3. And there is a range of material that's appropriate for within those. You'd want the southern material to remain in the south and not be planted up in the northern portion, and vice versa. Um, and then I would say that the last portion of that is, you know, chestnuts need to be protected. Everything, very nearly everything, loves chestnut. All the way from the deer and the squirrels and the bears, you know, down to the turkeys and the grouse that would feed on it and different portions of it. We're finding that the successful planting includes protection of the trees until they're able to get above the browse height of deer in particular.
Okay.
For purchasing or obtaining trees, the best thing to do is to become a member. So again, find your appropriate local chapter, become a member, and they will be able to best inform individuals on what material is available. Some chapters have seed and seedling sales. Some chapters coordinate distribution of seed during their meetings, and it's really more of a case by case local situation. So, becoming a member, we offer a seed level membership all the way through to a regular membership. Seed level membership is gives you the option of obtaining 4 of the most advanced backcross trees, and that's more of a thank you for supporting the organization. This is a research based operation. It is not a production nursery operation. We're not creating hundreds of thousands or even tens of thousands of trees at this point. We're very focused on the research. So looking to offer folks a thank you for their support, but more focused on obtaining the data and furthering the chance of getting the tree back out into the forest.
Okay. So, the next question that I have was, what about here on Staten Island? Can conservation groups consider adding chestnut to programs for wild spaces restoration, such as in the city parks and stuff like that?
So I would say, again, that's a case where contacting the New York chapter would be an excellent place to start. The national organization does work with nonprofits and other organizations, and can facilitate getting trees to plant as part of that restoration work. Typically, we try to also pair that with some sort of research that can be done. So whether it be a progeny test to test out some of the most advanced material that we have available and see how they perform long term, or planting a mix of backcross trees.
Recording stopped.
Okay, sorry about that. 1 second. Okay. All right, give me 1 second. I think it just.
Sure.
I can actually delete a couple of these videos here. 1 sec. That should free it up. Okay. I didn't ask to open any file. What are you talking about? Okay. Let me see if it'll record again.
Okay.
Continue.
Recording in progress.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So just an opportunity where we can match up research projects with helping nonprofit and other organizations to plant out trees in different areas and see how their performance is long term.
Okay. And are there any conservation groups that have done this already, like put them in the wild, or is it mostly like an orchard kind of thing?
We worked with a variety of organizations, and we've definitely done reintroduction plantings. So the trees have been planted out, and typically a forest that's gone through some sort of treatment, whether it be a harvest or some sort of thinning operation, so that the seedlings can get adequate sunlight and get established without too much competition pressure. And that's been where we're able to see these trees develop long term, and the results have been pretty promising on some of the sites.
Okay. And what types of care, attention, or vigilance is needed to make it work?
Yeah, this is a pretty lengthy topic. So tree planting is a pretty difficult thing to accomplish in the first place, and then it's even more difficult to get the trees to survive beyond that initial phase. One of the biggest things that we see is protection from deer and other wildlife during that establishment phase, when the young seedlings are very vulnerable to predation from uh, rodents and other animals that just want to have a buffet on the trees. So protection from that is key, as well as planting on an appropriate site to begin with. So looking for something that's suitable for the pH
Recording in
range,
progress.
as well as well drained and more of a sandy soil. Um, and what you want to do during this process, which takes truly about 3 to 5 years for a tree to become established on the site, is a lot of monitoring. Being out there and observing the trees is really the best way to determine how things are going, if they need additional protection, additional water, fertilizer, things of that nature. We have fact sheets that are available on the American Chestnut Foundation website that go through very detailed ways of uh, planting chestnuts from seed or seedling and getting them established on your location.
So the last few questions is what we're up to now. What are some of the challenges that you have faced in restoring this tree?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is simply time. We're working with an organism that lives for centuries, and trying to fit a tree's timeline into a human timeline is very challenging, especially when we have to wait a minimum of that 7 to 10 years just to reach reproductive maturity. So for the breeding program itself, that automatically locks us into this time frame of having to wait for the trees to produce flowers before we can move on to the next generation. Um, Additionally, I I would phrase them different from challenges. I would think these are just evolutions that have occurred, and that's improvements in technology and having better, cheaper access to things like genotyping and sequencing. So these new tools that were not available initially have come along and really been able to uh, expedite our program and our breeding work, and refine the results and techniques and procedures for what we need to do and how we need to do that.
Okay. And what are some of the successes that you guys have had?
I would say we have a lot of successes. First and foremost, I think the fact that we've built this network of over 5,000 members that are involved and dedicated to this foundation and the work of restoring the American chestnut. That's to me speaks volumes to our success, that folks believe in our mission, and they've been able to see the long view of this is something that's going to take decades at a minimum, and quite possibly could be something that you know folks outlive, or the tree and the research outlive individuals' lifespans, and they're willing to you know support the operation, as well as the techniques. So learning things like how to speed breed chestnuts, so that while we still have to wait for female flower production, we can accelerate male pollen production from that 7 years, or if we're lucky 5 years, down to two, and speed things up that way. The fact that we've been able to form partnerships and get these genome sequence, and have those reference genomes to use for making informed decisions on what breeding approaches are working, and maybe what families need to be removed from the breeding operation. Um, and then other advancements like using the genetically engineered material and continuing to see where that could lead. We're using technology that predates even the CRISPR that is more of a common term for folks to recognize. The techniques that we're using are um, predating that, so we still have a lot of runway to expand and take advantage of these more recent genetic techniques, and take advantage of those technologies.
Okay, awesome. And what is your hope or anticipation for the future?
Uh, Generally, I think my hope is that we'll be able to see the beginnings of a true restoration for the American chestnut. I think this is a process, and we're going to continue to see improvements, even decades from now, in terms of what's working in a quote unquote better tree. But it's going to require this collaboration of and combination of different processes and techniques to get there. And I'm just excited to see what the results of some of those combinations are, and to see how we can integrate more folks into this journey and get others excited about the American chestnut.
Awesome. And is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I would say thank you for the time, and for the interview, and that again, really encourage folks to look for the American Chestnut Foundation and consider becoming a member, and get out in the woods and help us find trees and continue the research.
Awesome. And your organization would teach people how to recognize the trees or the seeds in the forest? And you're kind of like looking to catalog them as well.
So we do have some informational materials on how to identify trees. What we typically focus on and rely on are people to go out, find trees, and submit samples to us. So on the website, there's instructions for how to submit a leaf and twig sample, and then we'll look at it under a microscope and make a determination of if it is an American chestnut, or if it's a hybrid, or one other chestnut species. Mud packing really is the best solution, and that involves you know scraping away the edges of an infection point of the edge of a canker, and using a plastic bag, or some folks use like metal flashing from roofing. Use that to kind of create a well around the stem of the tree, and then literally just pack it full of soil and water, and tape it up and seal it up. And leaving that on the tree for about a year will halt the canker's expansion. However, that's only for that specific canker. So you can imagine this is an effective way to extend the tree's life until you get out of reach in terms of light.
I see. Oh, fantastic. So, yeah, that's all the questions that I had for today. And it was really great meeting with you.
Okay, great.
But I really appreciate your taking the time to meet with us today. And I was excited to learn that the American chestnut tree could still be around one day soon. That it wasn't just a song that nobody knows about where it came from anymore.
No, they're still out there. It's just that most of them are kind of small and bushy looking trees in the understory, compared to the mighty, dominant trees that they used to be.